On 17th of June 2022, Final Fantasy VII enjoyed its 25th anniversary. 25 years, that's like 67.5675% of my entire life. Anyway, to celebrate, Square Enix held a special event filled with news and announcements, and today I'm going to go over the top 5 things that I'm hyped to see. Can't wait to get my hands on that Buster Sword clock. Also, the top 5 things I'm worried about. Does the clock keep time well? Before we get into that though, a message from our sponsor. We don't have a sponsor? Well, roll the intro, Pete, jeez! Before we dig into the details of what was unveiled in the 25th anniversary announcement yesterday, I need to warn you that I'll be talking about some of these things in the context of the existing games and movies in the Final Fantasy VII universe. So there are going to be spoilers ahead for every single entry and every single piece of media in the Final Fantasy VII series. So please be warned in advance. Now, with that out of the way, let's start the list. Of course, we need to start with the keynote announcement. Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 has been announced with the formal title of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. For Square, that's not actually a bad title. And I'm looking at you, Kingdom Hearts HD 2.8 Final Chapter Prologue. What sort of name is that? As you'd expect, the game seems to pick up where Remake left off. The party have defeated both Fate and Sephiroth and are now on their way to a new and brighter future. Given the scenes that feature Cloud and Sephiroth walking through Nibelheim, we can expect that the Calm flashback will probably be intact, but after that, who knows what twist this game is going to make. The pursuit of Sephiroth to Junon no longer really seems hugely relevant, given that he was beaten back in the first game, and so I wonder if that's going to mean we take a completely different adventure this time around. That's certainly what the materials are making us believe. Perhaps we're going to be fast-tracking our way to the City of the Ancients and the events that take place there. Seems a logical place to end the second game as one of the most pivotal scenes in the original. I don't think, no matter how much they adjust the story, that we're going to be able to avoid a visit to that city. So yeah, let's see what they do with that. I'm very interested and very hyped to see what new approach they're going to take with the game. I am really concerned at the announcement that there's only 3 games in the series. Now, given the size and the scale of Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first entry, Square are going to struggle to fit all of the story elements that we know and love from the original Final Fantasy VII game on PS1, and some things are going to need to be cut down. Will we see a reduced version of the events at Corel? Will the Junon soldier dress up be skipped? Don't cut out my boy Sito. From Midgar to the end of Disc 1 in the PS1 game, there are so many story elements that take place which culminate in a visit to the Temple of the Ancients and the City of the Ancients. And the original game uses that time to make you become heavily invested in the characters and the story. In this remade game, I have a real concern that we're going to be rushing too quickly past these world building elements and that the story will suffer for it. Ever Crisis is a retelling of the entire compilation of Final Fantasy VII, right the way from the events of Before Crisis, which was originally a mobile game released in Japan, through into Crisis Core, the PSP entry, over into the original Final Fantasy VII that played out in PS1, into the movie Advent Children, and culminating in the PS2 third-person shooter Dirge of Cerberus. The concept is a great one, and to be honest is far more aligned with what I expected the original remake announcement to be. Perhaps this is the game that Square Enix is targeting specifically at my generation, those who were kids playing the original Final Fantasy VII game in their bedrooms back in the 90s. I've never played through the Before Crisis storyline myself, which has led to a little bit of confusion, particularly with references in Crisis Core. But now, we can finally start to plug those knowledge gaps. I'm very much looking forward to checking this one out, and it was great to see the expanded trailer with footage from outside the original Final Fantasy VII game. The gameplay appears to feature the traditional turn-based battle system combat that we're familiar with from the original Final Fantasy VII, albeit with an updated user interface. The character models in the general world are quite reminiscent of, in my opinion, Final Fantasy IX. However, The battles that you get into are seen featuring much higher quality models that are much more realistic looking. This is something we also saw in the original game, of course with less quality all round just due to the limitations of the technology of the time. Also, short-haired Sephiroth? What? What are your theories on that? Let me know in the comments. I'm so concerned over the gacha elements that have been reported in this game. Talking to Famitsu, Final Fantasy VII's Remake's creative director Tetsuya Nomura said that we'll be able to play Ever Crisis for free, and I quote him, "The monetized element is basically loot boxes containing random weapons. Some of the special weapons also come as a set that includes new costumes that were not in the original games, adding in a new way to enjoy the story that you won't have seen before." In the new trailer that we saw in the announcement yesterday, we saw battles in Midgar that featured HP in the thousands. Now at this point in the original game, characters should be quite weak, so we're either seeing a rebalance of the game as a result of the new battle system that's in place which can deal damage more quickly and more efficiently, or we're seeing the results of a pay-to-win approach, and that being the new costumes giving major HP boosts. While these elements can be ignored from a gameplay perspective, I personally find them quite predatory. And it's ironic that Square Enix would include such a money-gouging approach in a game narrative that's designed around taking down a corporation obsessed with greed for more power. This is what I consider to be the Final Fantasy VII game to milk all other Final Fantasy VII games, quite literally. Crisis Core Reunion is something I never thought we'd see. I've talked about Crisis Core a lot on my Twitch channel, and we're actually due to start playing through this game very soon. Drop a follow if you haven't already. Now, the game was originally released on PSP, but it was only available on these physical UMD discs. It was never released on digital stores, neither was it made available for the Vita or any other platform after its original release. And this meant that if you wanted to play Crisis Core today, not only do you have to hunt down a physical copy of the game, but you also have to get yourself a PSP. And this makes the game quite inaccessible to a lot of the newer fans who've been discovering the series after Remake came out. And it's caused a lot of questions from those who had no idea who the black-haired dude was who was carrying Cloud's sword in all those flashbacks throughout the game. The rumours around why this game struggled to release are linked to the character Genesis, whose appearance is based on the Japanese rock star Gact. According to various different sources, the licensing deal that Square Enix agreed with Gact limited their ability to re-release the game in other formats, which does seem incredibly short-sighted. Now, I personally thought that the only way we would see Crisis Core again would be if they changed the design of Genesis. But here we are, in 2022, with an announcement of a Crisis Core remaster featuring the very same Genesis character. I was totally wrong on that one. The game seems much faster paced, with the ability to cast magic quickly and execute attacks in a fraction of the time of the original, and the game is also reportedly fully voice acted, which for a game releasing on current gen hardware really is almost a must. I'm incredibly excited to pick this one up and revisit this world. A few people and even one or two news outlets have reported that this game is a port of the original Crisis Core to the Final Fantasy VII Remake game engine, and that is not the case. Don't fall for Ondor's lies. And you can easily see in the gameplay footage where this isn't true. The assets that you see have been pretty much given the same treatment that Skyrim Special Edition was, and that is that textures have been improved and updated, a new lighting system has been implemented, along with new voice lines and faster paced combat. This should improve the general game experience, but we shouldn't be under any illusions that under the surface, this is the same game. The scenes that are shown include the Wutai Fort, the Genesis reveal, and various different combat scenes, and they are all reskins of what we saw in the original PSP version. That means that we're getting a PS5 level game with the technical restrictions of a PSP. One of my Twitch moderators, Nikarasu, has made an excellent comparison video between the PSP version of the game and the Reunion version of the gameplay footage that we were showing at the event, and I strongly recommend you check that video out so you can see for yourself the differences that you can see and the improvements that they have made, but on the understanding that you can still see that basic PSP game engine sitting underneath the surface. The approach to this game seems pretty lazy to me, doing the bare minimum to bring it up to modern standards, and I'd be wary about paying a AAA game price for such a basic port. Who am I kidding? I'm probably going to do it anyway. Sticking with Zack, we see him featured very prominently in the promotional materials for Rebirth, and that makes me think that the Crisis Core reunion is going to contain some elements that link Zack far more closely with the original story than he was before. How will Zack and the party react on seeing each other for the first time? What will Zack think about the history that Cloud claims to have? And how will Cloud react on seeing the person that he thinks he is in the flesh? This has the potential to rip the party apart and likely be one of the major catalysts for moving the story away from what we saw in the original game. Now, whilst we're not getting the exact true remake that I think all the fans have been asking for the last 20 years, this is still a really interesting story, and I'm very excited to see how this particular situation plays out. Maybe we'll even get some playable Zack time. Whenever the concept of time is brought up in media, the story and the narrative usually derails alongside that plot point. The only exceptions to this that I've seen are where the narrative is centrally focused on the concept of traveling through time. For example, Back to the Future. As soon as this mechanic is shoehorned into an existing story that had no element of time travel before, things usually start to fall apart and major plot holes start to open up. We have a major potential for one of those here in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The trailer shows Zack carrying Cloud into Midgar. Cloud's with the party already. So this really means that only one of three things can be true. Number one, in this universe, Zack and Cloud have both survived. And at some point before the start of Final Fantasy VII Remake, they've gone their separate ways, with Cloud recovering from his Mako poisoning and taking or being gifted Buster Sword from Zack. Let's call that the single timeline theory. After the events of Remake, number two, the defeat of fate. Zack was able to beat the soldiers that were attacking him, and he branched off into another timeline, which is entirely separate to what we're seeing in Remake, but which somehow might rejoin when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So two timelines running parallel, one with Cloud leading the party, the other one with Zack and Cloud together doing whatever they're doing in the world. We'll call that one the two timeline theory. Number three, after the events of Remake and the defeat of fate, Zack was able to beat the soldiers. He then somehow joined the existing timeline with a duplicate Cloud that's suffering from that severe Mako poisoning that we saw somewhere in Midgar. That means that at this point in time, we have the party who've just left Midgar, Zack and another Cloud somewhere out in the world, and at some point potentially those two parties are going to meet up together. We'll call that the two Clouds theory. So we have the single timeline theory, we have the two timeline theory, and we have the two Clouds theory. What makes me wary is that none of these concepts are easily explainable in the story narrative, and I fear that we're going to yet see more lazy plot devices to force these concepts in, which I feel can only harm the otherwise strong narrative of the game. We'll have to wait and see, but what do you think we'll see? And do you agree with the theories, or do you have a theory of your own? Let me know in the comments. I had to combine these two together because they are one and the same. In one way I'm really hyped, but at the same time I'm really wary. I can't believe the sheer volume of Final Fantasy related content that we're going to be getting over the next couple of years. We've just had Stranger of Paradise come out, we're due to get Crisis Core this year, we're getting the closed beta test of Ever Crisis this year, Final Fantasy 16 next year, Rebirth in the winter of next year. Those of us who are invested in this content have got a really fun couple of years ahead of us. With great volume comes great responsibility, however. The legacy of Final Fantasy VII was to be one of the greatest Final Fantasy stories ever told, the first 3D game in the series, and something that shook up the entire industry with the launch of the PS1. It holds a special place in the hearts of many people because for a lot of us at the time, it was the best looking game we'd ever seen with an incredibly engaging story to match it. With all of the remakes and remasters and sequels and prequels, I fear for the legacy of the name Final Fantasy VII. 10 years from now, If you ask someone what their thoughts are on Final Fantasy VII, will they think of the great classic, or will they just think of the series as a whole? Arguably, the extended universe stuff, outside of a few exceptions, has been less than great. Square Enix can't get it 100% right all of the time, and the more entries that we see in the series, the more opportunities they have to mess things up for future generations. I'd like to see a conclusive end to the series at some point, perhaps at the end of the 3 parts of Remake, and then we should just let the name rest. I hope I'm wrong to be wary on this, I really do. I love the game and the world that's built up around it, but I don't want to see it fall into ruin. And that's it for this video today. What are your thoughts on the announcement? This type of video is a first for me to make. I don't normally do these commentary, narrative type videos where I give an opinion on something that I've seen. But if you liked it and you want to see more content like this, please let me know by either clicking the like button or drop a comment. If you want to ask me more about any of my thoughts on any of these points, feel free to join my Twitch stream. The link's in the description below. I'm live from 9 PM UK time every single weekday. I hope to see you there, and watch out for more videos at some point in the future soon. Bye for now.